I just want to preface with this is going to be very hard to follow up with. But I guess I'll just have to start detailing another shitty situation. Cue laugh track. Um, the self legislation, tech, and community involvement, essential aspects of progressing society. So I was actually approached by Amy and Kevin, the president of the EFF, Austin, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who is a fellow board member. I as well am a board member, and the whole aspect of this is to. He asked me, what do I think are some constructive, positive things that people can be doing with the existential and legal crisis that Black people and people of color are facing during this era of police brutality and its revelations. So I'm going to continue forward. So this is me. By day, I am a paralegal. By night, I am a researcher, writer, and comic book junkie. Um, Also an activist. This is me earlier this year, and I would say it's probably one of the six highlights of this year. I had the wonderful privilege of going to New York and visiting the MoMA, and I got to hang out with one of my favorite deities there. That's Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge, and that's him inscribed on the Temple of Isis, and that's me holding the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And given the topic of the situation, I figured why not use the blackest picture of myself that I have and my most favorite picture of myself simultaneously. Without further ado, I will continue forward once more, and I will not say that after every slide, I promise. So I would like to open with a quote by my hero and the man that changed my life, Albert Camus, or if you want to get French, Albert Camus. Um, and this is from his collection of essays, The Rebel. The strangeness of things is shared with all men. Human reality in its entirety suffers from the distance which separates it from the rest of the universe. And I think that this is pretty timely. This collection of essays was pretty much a sequel to his more well-known The Myth of Sisyphus, in which Camus discusses that the human condition is in fact an absurd one. The Rebel discusses rebelling against that absurdity, kind of as the title of the collection message would say. Um, he explains that what inherent in absurdity itself is the ability and the possibility for it to basically birth or create something that would oppose it. And Camus kind of explains that briefly, that that's within humans, within people. And I think that if we recognize that right now, each and every human being is experiencing some dialect or flavor or version of absurdity, it will be easier and more, I guess, smoother when we try to communicate with each other. Especially given the or the four aspects in this presentation, which are the self, technology, legislation, and community involvement. I believe that the best thing and the most positive thing that we can be doing right now is thinking about these aspects and factors and figuring out how we're going to continue and build our community with these ideas in mind. Because you can have your riots and your peaceful protests and everything, but your community will fall apart if you don't build it, no matter how just of a cause you're fighting for. So, taking these things in mind, I would like for everyone to consider community building. So I'll start with the self. There are lots of parts to the self. There's the young self, the old self, the middle-aged self, the self that we project onto other people and hope that those around us believe that that's who we are. There are a lot of aspects to the self, and we all have those various aspects. And so I think the most binding aspect is thought, consciousness. And thought and consciousness is something that's very acutely and effectively discussed within the realm of cognitive science. Because when you're looking at cognitive science, you're looking at intelligence and behavior, along with nervous systems, along with the transfers of information, and the just various faculties that make up how we communicate with each other, how we interpret the world, and how we exist as people, and how we process within ourselves to continue living. So the cognitive scientist that I'm going to focus on this evening is Daniel C. Dennett. He's a cognitive scientist and philosopher, and he describes consciousness as a stream that's consistently going through editorial processes as opposed to just the idea of the Cartesian theater, which has been popular, which is that there's some man sitting inside or some person sitting inside of your head observing everything and recording that, and that's what thought is. We have evolutionary and biological evidence that there are various other ways the brain could be working. And Daniel C. Dennett describes that in his wonderful book, Consciousness Explained. But the most key aspect, I think, to take from Dennett is that consciousness, because it's a biological process, feature, whatever you want to call it, it's an aspect of survival. It's not perfect. It's consistently taking in information and while at the same time trying to maintain a norm. Because that happens, there's a lot that can be missed. And we miss things, but we're not aware that we miss them because we're not aware of what we're aware of. And we're not aware of what we're not aware of. But I think that, to go back to community building going forward, if you take into consideration that this is what each and every individual is going through all the time, then community building would be a lot more effective because we can begin to cover each other's blind spots. I think that's dramatically important in any kind of social structure. So on the multiple drafts theory, to spare you guys a lot of ridiculous dense jargon, I'm just going to sum it up very briefly. It is, like I said, editorial processes. And what happens is we experience things and the brain catalogs it. And then as we continue to experience things with similar aspects or elements, the brain continues to catalog and make associations. And I think that one of the flaws to be aware of is that sometimes we'll think we're looking at X and it might be Y just because there are a few similar aspects between X and Y. Like these several versions of Superman during Infinite Crisis. I mean, yes, they all have Superman qualities, but if you look at them, they have very distinct and differentiating features. And once again, taking a societal view of things, if you recognize that everyone has gone through this multiple drafts of consciousness and consider that everyone has their own blind spots, when you put each perspective together, you get a more holistic view of how things are. I don't like to use the word objectively or absolute because I just try not to concede to those. But again, when you have more perspectives, you are more aware of the things that you wouldn't begin to realize that you weren't aware of. So now I'm going to move over to tech because that pretty much establishes, the self aspect of community building. And I decided to use two of the most brilliant minds in the DC universe here, Mr. Terrific and Natasha Irons. They use technology and their understanding of science to battle evil on multiversal scales on a regular basis. And maybe we can do the same in regards to fixing some of the issues that we have in our own world. So humanity has always had tools to enhance their capabilities and expand capabilities and expand our possibilities. And not only do these tools affect the way that we accomplish tasks, but they also can have an effect on our evolutionary development. So if you seeing this picture, I have set up here a picture of an edge-to-edge bite and the overbite. Um, the overbite is more common. Now, in his article, Eggs in the Face, F in the Mouth, and the Overbite, the anthropologist C. Loring Brace, kind of funny that his name is Brace and he's discussing dentition, discusses how after eating utensils were introduced, the shape of the face and the skull started changing more to an overbite and less of the edge-to-edge bite. So this might seem random. You might be thinking, why is he talking about eating utensils and teeth after he just got through discussing cognitive science? But I promise it makes sense. So take that concept of the way that eating utensils affected the skull, and let's think about how internet is affecting the brain. We already see it affecting our behavior, but I mean, honestly, it's really too early for us to be doing any kind of experiments or whatnot to see exactly how it's affecting our brain. But if eating utensils affected the teeth, I think it's fair to hypothesize that the internet is affecting our humanity. Um, so what is the internet? It's one of the most prominent tools. I would actually say it's the most prominent tool that we have today. And it has allowed individuals across the world to share and access just divine, godly amounts of information at unprecedented speeds. And it's not like there's only one way to use the internet. You can hop on PlayStation and beat the hell out of your friend in Mortal Kombat. You can hop on a Reddit forum and have a nice discussion. There are all kinds of ways to use the internet, and it has bound us to internet culture. And so that culture and the way that we communicate is now inherent in our brains. Now, again, how does this tie into community building and the self and all of that? Just like cognitive science, all of these things are interdisciplinary aspects of the human condition. And I'm going to just kind of repeat this every so often. From this point going forward, understanding the human condition means understanding these things. And to effectively community build, which is what I think is the best solution, and figuring out how to community build while we have the time to do it, it is the best thing that anyone can be doing during this anxious time. So back to the internet, social media. So right now, through the hashtag, everyone on the planet could be a part of the same conversation at the same time. Again, completely unprecedented. And while that's happening, and while that is a very, powerful thing, we also have these various platforms employing their algorithms to determine what to show us, what content to show us based on how we interact with previous content, based on our history, based on our digital footprint alone. And so instead of showing us, a variety of information, we see personalization and the filter bubble effect. Now, the filter bubble effect is discussed by Eli Pariser in his wonderful book, um, the filter the filter bubble, how the new personalized web is changing what and how we think. I think I'm missing some words out of the title, but I can't see over something. Sorry. How the new personalized web is changing what we read and how we think. Now, personalization, just to back up here, is that process that I kind of described earlier with the algorithms and everything. It's all of these tools showing us what they think we want to see. And if we go back to the self that I was discussing earlier and the multiple drafts theory, we're already biologically predispositioned to only kind of see the things that kind of confirm our expectations. So while our tools can provide mass communication, in certain hands, they can also trap us within our own perspective and prevent any kind of synthesis of thought and progress. And Pearser, being the activist and even entrepreneur that he is, kind of discusses this in this quote. Democracy requires citizens to see things from one another's point of view, but instead we're more and more enclosed in our own bubbles. Democracy requires a reliance on shared facts. Instead, we're being offered parallel but separate universes. By illustrating some possibilities and blocking others, the filter bubble has a hand in decisions, and in turn it shapes who you become. So again, I think that when you think about community building, you have to think about communicating with individuals. And when you're communicating with individuals, you have to take into consideration that though they may have very ignorant and very uninformed ideas, opinions, and what have you, it might not entirely be their fault, because quite honestly, social media is a very, very new phenomenon. And like I was saying earlier, we don't really know how it's affecting our brain, but it's clear that based on how people are behaving and how elections can be affected by social media and how economies can be driven by narratives in social media, excuse me, that it has an effect on us. And in order to community build and understand the individual and effectively communicate, we have to take these factors into consideration. So next, I'm going to discuss legislation, and this is actually, oh, that is not, okay, sorry. So this is a brief slide or a brief panel from Injustice. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful comic. Um, and at this point in the series, the Flash and the Green Lantern have decided to basically take Congress hostage because they have failed to understand who they represent and having petty disputes in during a government shutdown while the world is literally falling apart. I just think it's very powerful imagery. So when you think about legislation, it sets the parameters of legality. You know, it gives us an understanding of what realm we can operate in without facing any kind of punishment. And at the same time, you know, I don't know if you've ever tried reading legislation, but it's just like Miss Catherine Pride here trying to swim through concrete, except you don't have the superpowers. Um, we're living bound by laws that most people can't read. And it's not for a lack of intelligence. It's not because people are stupid. It's because it takes training to understand and to be able to interpret these pieces of legislation. And I just want to posit the question for you to kind of ponder on and think about, you know, can we really justify a society in which the people can't or don't have the time at least, or sometimes even the resources to understand the laws by which they're governed? And so as, you know, the citizenry continues to not really be able to read and understand and interpret legislation all the time, it lags behind and the world continues to progress. And we have technology that operates within realms and in possibilities that archaic laws could never have understood or predicted to begin with. And so we're unnecessarily limited by an uneducated understanding that is inherent in our legal system and in our laws. So habeas data was written by a researcher, Cyrus Farivar. Here's a quote: "The law, then as now, often struggled to keep up with the common realities of the day." And it actually discusses a series of basically breaches upon the Fourth Amendment and the right to privacy, and how that started really, I mean, in 1929 with this Olmsted versus the United States. This was the first wiretapping case in United States history. And it's it's kind of sad that the courts had determined that there was no violation of the defendant's Fourth Amendment rights, even though no warrant had been issued. Um, and this didn't stop. So in 42, during Goldman versus the United States, um, gets more intense, and that you had FBI agents sitting in a wall next to not sitting in a wall, goodness, sitting in a room next to suspects, and they had a device rigged in the wall between the two rooms. And the Supreme Court ruled that there was no interception via wire communication any more than someone overhearing the conversation from sitting in another room. So we're seeing, between the 20s and 40s, and we will see going on, that without understanding the specificities of technology, our not updated legislation can allow for a lot of abuses to be used, to be justified and allowed. And I would like to quote Supreme Court Justice Frank Murphy on Golden versus the United States in response to this situation. The conditions of modern life have greatly expanded the range of those activities which require protection from intrusive action by government officials, if men and women are to enjoy the full benefit of that privacy the Fourth Amendment was intended to provide. It is our duty to see that this historic provision receives a construction sufficiently liberal and elastic to make it serve the needs and matters of each succeeding generation. That means that we need people that understand technology handling legislation. And again, going back to the self and community building, it might be something worth considering that, to have someone who sufficiently understands how social media and algorithms and personalization works, creating laws. And it would be even more, effective if they were created and written in such a way that they could be interpreted effectively and smoothly by the citizenry as a whole. So in 2009, and this is just an outrageous case, in my personal opinion, during a jury brief on a 2007 case in which basically a tracker was placed on someone's Jeep, the Department of Justice argued that even though this device was placed on this person's vehicle without a warrant, it was not a violation of their rights, because when that person decided to drive their Jeep in the public, they were inherently exposing themselves to public information to begin with. Therefore, it couldn't be argued, according to the Department of Justice, that there was a breach of the Fourth Amendment. Luckily, that didn't fly, and it was determined that that was complete BS, and that was handled a lot better than it could have been. But had the justice that handled that not handled that, imagine, the catastrophe. And now we have phones with GPSs inside of them. That was 2009. 2020 and 2009 are dramatically different places. I mean, if you're doing something and you just happen to be somewhere that a particular power doesn't like or appreciate, you know, you could be accused of being a quote-unquote terrorist. And I would like to close the legislation section with a current bill that's actually sitting in the Texas House Committee, HB 352, and it allows for law enforcement to warrantlessly obtain information collected from cell site simulator devices in the case of a life-threatening situation if the device exists within the officer's territorial jurisdiction. Otherwise, an officer would need a warrant. Now, here's where my concern lies. If we are in a time where an officer can claim that having a water bottle thrown at them can merit a literal war crime, then it probably is not that hard for them to consider any and every idea of any kind of transgression upon their will a life-threatening situation. And that being the case, I think it's important to take into consideration that we don't know how the Department of Justice is going to begin categorizing people as Antifa members, even though it's a loose-knit organization with really no grouping, so you really can't. Anyway, it can be dangerous to be in certain places at certain times, is what I'm trying to get at, especially when law enforcement has devices such as these cell site simulator devices that, and forgive me if I didn't explain, what these do is they mimic your cell phone provider towers, and they take whatever information from your phone your cell phone provider would be taking. Um, and this was authored by Texas Representative Cesar Blanco. And like I said, it was left to the committee at the end of the Texas 2019 legislative session, and it will be reviewed by the Texas House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence. Just something to keep in mind. So now that we've gotten through all of the hard, dense parts, I think community involvement is the ultimate rebellion, the ultimate way to counteract these issues that we're seeing. And after we've spent time incubating and thinking about, excuse me, the previous three subjects, we can come together and start effectively community building. So before you can build a community, before you get involved in a community, you have to have a discussion. Um, you can't have a functioning society if the participants can't converse. And again, I think that once you take into mind the way that consciousness works, or could be working, if it's just a theory, alongside what kind of tools and technology is affecting what information is feeding the consciousness, on top of what parameters of legality the consciousness can operate on, only then can you begin to have an effective and cohesive discussion. And it's through those filtered and refined discussions that we determine our values individually and collectively, and are able to determine the functionality of our society. And it's important to keep these subjects in mind because they're prominent over our individual and group life. I mean, again, all these factors affect us. They affect us as individuals, they affect us as groups. Now, secure communication is key. Um, there are a lot of tools to do that. Like I said earlier, you don't know how, who is going to be labeled as what. So using Tor, Signal, Tails, keep yourself safe, keep your information secure, use encrypted channels. That is the only way that one would be able to effectively build a society in a corroding society. And luckily, there are a lot of organizations that are striving to fight against a variety of issues. You've got the Austin Justice Coalition that's done marvelous work on helping, to combat racial inequality. The organization that I'm with, EFF Austin, we provide a lot of educational resources and speeches and presentations on technology and legislation regarding technology. And you have the American Civil Liberties Union of Texas. They do a lot of activist work as well. There are a lot of people that could use your hand, and there are a lot of people that have a basis of knowledge. So if you're afraid and you don't understand something, a lot of these organizations, including EFF Austin, we will welcome you with warm arms. And if you want to, put together a project, if you have an issue, there are people that want to fight with you. And if there aren't, then sometimes you have to start your own organization, depending on whatever issue it might be. But more chance than not, if it bothers you, it more than likely bothers someone else. And here are some references and resources. And beyond that, that is my very long-winded um, jigsaw of a presentation.
David, that was great. Do you have a resource screen you want to share with us while during the Q&A?
um, yes, so actually there is so these are several places where you can donate to. EFF Austin, Austin Justice Coalition, the Sunlight Foundation, which is a wonderful nonprofit. I use one of their wonderful apps. It's just called Congress. And you just hop right on the Congress app and you can see exactly what the United States Congress was discussing that week. And it gives you direct links to bills so that you're not looking at bills that are being interpreted by someone else. You get the baseline facts. I linked in the ACLU site here, the Awesome Women League of Voters, and the Open Secrets Project, which provides information on candidate funding and their voting history. And on the slide before this, there's actually links to some security tools and the books that I mentioned in the presentation.
Okay, great. Well, we would be glad to put those up in our groups. So we'll get those on Facebook, which is, you know, I see the irony there. But we do have some questions. Hopefully that was just an
Sure.
allergy cough, not a COVID cough. We'll see how that works out. If I'm dead next month, you'll know. Let's see. So we have a few questions, and one of them is kind of a philosophical question, which I think will suit you. Do you think the responsibility of exposure to a variety of information / sources / opinions falls more on the user or the media platform?
So I think that it's honestly the responsibility of both. I don't think that it's one person is more at fault or more responsible than the other. I think that as a participant in an institution within a society, any platform or source of information should want the best for the people that are accessing it. And I understand, how silly that might sound in a capitalist society, but like I was discussing, in considering future community building, you have to determine your values. And I think that it's the institution's job, it's insofar as a society allows it in and allows it to practice its practices, it should be doing the best for those people. Now, at the same time, to quote Rousseau, the law doesn't protect people, people protect the law. I think that it's also on the hands of the users to understand the tools that they're, using as best as they can, and to, come together as a community and say this is harming us, or this needs to be changed in order to better our community. So I think it's a two-way street.
That makes sense. All right. So there are a lot of good questions, and I have a feeling that we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So I'm going to try to pop a few high points, and then I'll try to grab the text. And if you want to answer any of them later, you'd be welcome to do that on, whatever internet medium feels right for you. But one of the ones that kind of pops for me is, now that we know the government can basically suck up your phone data passively at any time, is it better to leave your phone at home if you go out to a protest, or even if you're going to an area where protests might be, even if you're not part of it? How can people protect themselves in those situations?
So yes, I think that if you want to 100% reduce any liability of being at that place, it's best to just leave your phone at home. But the unfortunate part about that is, even if you do, um, what'll happen is, oh, I'm still screen sharing. I'm sorry, everybody. What'll happen is you might communicate with someone over text or over messenger or whatever. Hey, let's meet up at XYZ. I think that the thing that you can do to make sure that you're most secure is, first of all, communicate via Signal, via Proton Mail, via some kind of secure network with encryption, etc. Form a meeting place, whatever you're going to do, and then proceed to leave your device at home.
Excellent. I think I want to leave, have your last question be another philosophical one, because I've just really get a good feeling on those from you. Um, and there are two questions I'm going to hopefully condense into one. Um, how do we change how we do things to create a deeper sense of empathy, or to create this all-inclusive sense of community that we need?
So I think one of the primary things is to begin with self-reflection and then ask, I mean, I hate to refer to the golden rule, but like, if you don't want to live in a world where everyone's treated the same, I think that you should probably get some sort of therapy or mental help of some sort. Um, and I think that recognizing that everyone's circumstances are relative, and that, like I discussed earlier, there are a lot of blurred ideas when we come into contact with different phenomena. So just because it has elements of a narrative that you would expect it to be doesn't mean that that's the case. So you have to, I think, to increase empathy, one would have to accept the absurdity of the fact that they don't know what another person's situation is, and trust that they would be honest about something horrible, something, such as being threatened on a regular basis, such as not being listened to. No one wants to experience those things. So taking into consideration that just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean that it's not happening or that it doesn't happen.
Wonderful note, and that's a great place to end.